board who had experience with specifically biomedical patents, where they could say that this is the language that you want to use within this particular claim, whereas if you use this language, it will not likely pass muster of the patent office. And the eventual outcome of both of those things were that we have 2 patents issued now in a much more efficient way than we could have imagined, both within the US and overseas with European Union, surprisingly China, which is actually extraordinarily surprising, India and other places as well, because we had the right people aboard, and I knew that I didn't have the expertise to be able to drive that forward by myself. And so you have to be able to recognize where your skills are, where your training is, where you should best spend your time, and when to rely on others, and trust them to be able to give you the best of themselves so that you get the result that you're looking for. So self-awareness, self-assessment. So the next thing is active listening. When we talk about effective communication often, and communication is about both transmitting and receiving. So it's one thing to stand in front of a room and to give information out, or to have a conversation with someone and to say things to them, but it's very different to receive that information, understand it, and be able to act on it. So it is extraordinarily important that within any context where you are an active listener. And active means both understanding what's going on, what's being said to you, but it also means being able to then act on the information that's provided to you. I think one of the things that's helped me out most through all of the experiences that I've had, and that's going back to graduate school and undergrad as well, being in the different organizations, being within the offices here, just working around. What's helped me quite often is that, and this is because I'm a reserved introvert, I often don't just jump into a conversation. The conversation develops and I listen to exactly what's being said, understand sort of the conversation flow. I always ask the question at the beginning of any meeting, what are our objectives here? And try to tie the conversations to the objectives. And when I provide input, the input takes into account everything that's been said, and I'm able to then inject my specific actions or my specific concerns and drive the conversation in the direction I think it should be. And so that does a couple of things. One, it helps everyone in the room understand that I have listened to what they have said, that I've taken into account their input, and it also allows me to then, because I don't speak a lot, I speak enough to be able to have influence. If you're speaking a lot, speaking all the time, then people will hear you and then they will sometimes tune you out. But if you're selective about when you speak and how you speak, then you can have a greater influence over the conversation and the eventual action that comes. The other part of this is that you listen and you understand the needs, but you also gain trust when you respond to what people say. I think the best example that I have of this is within my current role as the Associate Director of the Minority Engineering Program. So when I first got into the role, the first thing that I did before being an associate, just coming into MEP, was I sat down with every staff member and I just listened to what their advice was. What are the current state of affairs? What needs to be done? And how can I best assist you? That was the consistent questioning for every staff member. Current state of affairs, what needs to be done, how can I best assist you? Now, it sounds great. I mean, I'm going on a listening tour, I'm understanding people, but it does not work well if that last question does not have action associated with it. The how can I best assist you then has to turn into, I come back to you 2 weeks later and say that these things have been done. Because I actively listened to exactly what you had to say, and I understood what your primary needs were, and I was able to deliver on those primary needs. If you're able to do that on a consistent basis with people, you gain their trust, they know that you're reliable, they know that you're not only listening, but you will deliver to them, and it creates an environment where people then come to rely on you, and you have the sort of influence that you want to have. People will come to you with every and anything, which you can or can't want. It can be good and bad. but they'll come to you because they trust you and trust that things will get done as a result of your actions. And that's really, really important to have, to be able to engender that sort of trust with people. So another portion of an important trait or important skill associated with being a leader is being accountable. So that means not only being the one in front of the room, standing in front of the room and talking. It means that with your team, there may be things that go well and things that go badly. And when things don't go well, it is important that you are accountable as the leader, that you essentially shield your team from blame, from external blame. You do some dissection later on, but being the leader, you have to stand up and say that this was the decision of the team, this is the direction I went, we didn't quite get to where we wanted to go, and I accept the responsibility associated with that. And you have to be willing to do that. If you're not willing to do that, then you're not going to be a good leader. You won't be someone that your team members trust, and you won't be someone that the external folks that you answer to will be able to come to with issues and problems. So I always say recognize your team members for any successes that the team sees. Make sure the team members are always receiving compliments as a result of any successes that come about. But whenever anything goes wrong externally, it is up to the leader to be able to take blame for that and then deal with it internally. Figure out exactly how things went wrong, what went wrong, without necessarily going after anyone, but really just understanding what the situation was and driving towards solutions. This is really, really important. Some of my experience with this, I have a lot of experience with this with NSBE in particular. So one of the interesting things about being on the board of directors is that you will often in directors meetings have some wild, varied opinions about what things should happen or should not happen, how things should happen, and you can go around and around for hours until you meet a consensus for a decision. And so one sort of consensus for a decision, or one consensus that came about during my time as the chairman of the board, was that we were not going to continue with the contract for someone who was beloved by the organization and beloved by all within the organization, all stakeholders, being members, being funders, really everyone involved in some way. So within the room, there was a lot of dissension, but the final decision was we will not move forward. And so as the chairman of the board, as the leader within that situation, I had to go out in public to all stakeholders and be able to express what the decision was, to be able to hear a lot of negative feedback associated with it, and to be able to defend it consistently and accept any blame associated with that without spreading that to anyone else within the organization. And that was very, very difficult. There was one particular meeting I went to in which this was the board of corporate affiliates. So these are the major funders of the organization. They pay $40,000 plus per year in order to be a part of this board, and they make up something like 60% of the budget of the organization, of a $12 million organization. So a lot of money on the line. I went to this meeting, and there were shots fired at me, left and right. And it was really, really difficult, and it could have been a situation where I pointed to particular board members and said that it was their decision, or it was this one's decision, or this was the opinion, but you're not in the position to do that at all. You have to be able to understand exactly what your stakeholders are saying, but still be able to defend your team and then bring back to the team exactly what the feedback was and be able to adjust on the fly, to let them know that this is what's coming in, this is what our response needs to be. Let's figure out how to go about making this response so that we can be successful going forward. And you have to be able to do that and not cast blame on others as a leader, to be a successful leader. Clarity and expectations. So how many people currently lead a team of some type? Okay. And how many people would say that their team members all know exactly what they are supposed to deliver on? Okay. So we're going to work on this. It is really important as a leader to set out not only for the team the overall goals, but for all individuals to know exactly how they contribute to those goals and be very clear on what they are to deliver and how, well, not how, what they are to deliver and when they are to deliver what is expected. You want to be able to express the what and give your team members the ability to then figure out the how, because they should have creativity within their positions to determine that, and they have the skills and abilities to do that. But it's really important that they know what and when. You have to be able to tell them what you expect of them and when it's expected of them in order for them to deliver on time for the team overall. Because if they don't have that, then they will make guesses, and their guesses may not be what you expect, and oftentimes won't be what you expect. They won't be able to read your mind. Don't expect that. If you clearly articulate to them a goal, and I list out SMART goals here, how many know what the acronym SMART stands for? You don't count. Yes, what does SMART stand for?
I'm going to give you the first three.
Okay.
It's specific, measurable, right, achievable.
Yep, got the first three.
So is the T time?
Time bound, yep.
I don't remember the R.
So R can be, and there are a couple of different options here, relevant or realistic. I tend to use relevant, meaning relevant to the task at hand or relevant to the overall goal. So something that's specific, that's measurable, that's achievable, that's relevant and time bound. If you provide people goals within this context, use this framework, then they know exactly what they need to deliver and have the freedom and ability to go about delivering that for you and for the team. If you're not specific, then people will be confused and they will not deliver in the ways that you want them to be. This is something I learned very early on within my NSBE career. When I first became a regional executive board member, I learned this framework for goal making and also some strategic planning, and I have used it in every position I've been in since. Every position from a nonprofit standpoint and every professional position as well, and it has served me very well for a couple of reasons. One, people always appreciate knowing what you expect of them. They really like the idea of you telling them, this is what I need from you, because they can go after that if it's something that's specific and measurable. And then if it's something that needs to change over time, then you have the ability to go back and reference a document that has information that tells you how you can tweak things. And the other thing is it helps you to be able to hold others accountable, because you've been very clear at the very beginning what is expected of them to do. They can figure out how to do it, and when things aren't going well, you always refer back to the SMART goal. And you've agreed to it at the very beginning of your project or whatever endeavor you're going upon, and folks can see, you know, I am doing well or I'm not doing so well. And then they can make decisions about whether or not they can be good contributors to the team. But that comes from being an effective leader and manager and being able to lay out specifically what they should do and how, so that they can figure out how to do it. Okay, scenario planning. So this is an odd picture for you guys. But this is actually a picture of my living room in New Orleans from December of 2004. And so I actually want you to carefully look at me right now and look at the shape of my head. And if you look in that picture, there's a silhouette there that is that same shape. And I'm not really sure why I took that picture. I think I got a new digital camera, and so I wanted to take some pictures at the time. But this is actually up there, and I'm glad we can't zoom in on this. This is my high school graduation picture. That is my sister's high school graduation picture, my brother's. That was my nephew's stroller, flipping at the time, and all sorts of other things. Not really sure why I took that picture, but that's December 2004. And this is December 2005. Anyone know what happened in 2005? Hurricane Katrina. So I show this photo because I'll share some personal experience. This was taken when I flew to Baton Rouge. My mom and my sisters were in Baton Rouge, and I drove with my mom to New Orleans at the time to help clean up. And I'm not really sure why I took that picture, but it happens to be almost in the exact same place. So December 2004, December 2005. And so I show this to talk about a few different things. I typically in presentations talk about engineering and the importance of engineering and what it can and can't do, or how bad engineering can lead to personal tragedies, as you can see in that picture. The background of this is actually a little bit deeper in that I was here doing my PhD at the time. And so I remember very clearly during the days, as soon as Katrina hit, my mom and my sisters left New Orleans, but my dad and my brother stayed. And they were in eastern New Orleans, which is there and was very hard hit. So I remember going back and forth with my brother on the night of August 28th, and going back and forth with a lot of texts, a lot of concerned texts, leading to a last text from him saying, the water's coming in really fast. And that was all I heard for 5 days. So in that period of 5 days, my mind went to many different places, including the worst case scenario. And I talk about that because you kind of have to be able to go there with your decision making. As a leader, you have to understand what is the best case and what is the worst case, and what does it mean if the worst case comes to be. Now, at the time, I also, in thinking about the worst case, had very trying emotional moments, particularly at my house, being alone, being so far away and not being able to see or do anything. But I had to also think about, if this worst case comes to be, which I really don't hope does not happen, then what do I do? What is my decision making? What do I need to do to support my family? And this is an extreme personal example, but one that I think should resonate in some way in the overall decision making, overall thinking that one has to do in leading a team or group. When you make a decision, what can be the downside of that decision? What is the upside of that decision? If it goes bad, what do you do? How do you deal with it? Can you effectively deal with it? So what are the potential outcomes, and how do you manage those outcomes? Fortunately, the story has a happy ending. My father and brother were flown out, then flown out to the Superdome, then went to Houston, and they were safe. Others did not have that same happy ending. But I did think for a good few days about how I would be able to move things forward, move things on. How would I be effective with my family if the worst did come to be? And I think you kind of have to step into that situation in any sort of transaction that you go through. What could be the worst case, and how do you deal with that if it does come to pass? So one more personal story, focus and persistence. And so I have in this picture on the left side a picture of myself, my mom in the back, my aunt, and my grandfather sitting there in the front. This was from a couple of years ago before he passed away. My grandfather was a fantastic person in so many ways, and such a really fascinating person to listen to. He could tell stories for days about his experiences. He actually went into the Navy when he was 14, traveled all around the world, saw the world, and for every major stage of World War I, he was there in some way, and he can tell you all the stories associated with that. He could also tell you the stories associated with the political changes within New Orleans, the political upheaval in New Orleans, and what he went through during that time and what had to be done. One story that he shared was one of voting. There was one particular year in voting in a presidential election where you go to your precinct, wherever the precinct voting station is. You stand in line and you go through the line and you check in and you vote, which is the sort of typical, normal way things occur. For him, this particular time, it was different. So he went up, had everything in place, had ID, signed up, signed in to be able to vote, and was told that no, he could not vote. And so he was told that he should just go home. He started to leave and did leave out, but then decided to go to the back of the line and start the process again. Walk through the line, get to the front, and once again told, you can't vote, go home. And so he did leave again, go to the back of the line, and continued that cycle until he was able to vote that day. And so, to me, that is the ultimate example of persistence and focus that one can have. In a time when it was actually dangerous for him to be in any way, I won't say aggressive, in any way assertive about what should have been an easy right to vote. He decided to, over and over again, exert persistence to the point where he could vote. He did it for himself, clearly, that day, but also for his family. He was a father of 8 children and eventual children and grandchildren, to be able to sort of change the way things worked, because he knew that that was not how things should be. I think any leader should have that sort of focus to understand long-term, if you're talking about vision, long-term, how things should be, and be able to persist even though there's slights in front of you, even though there are barriers in front of you that can change or that can try to stop what you're trying to achieve. To be able to persist over time is extraordinarily important and will lead you to be able to achieve whatever your goals are. It goes back to what your vision is, what strategy you use, what tactics you want to use in order to get there. And I often go back to a weekly review as an action item for me to understand, as I'm moving towards what I think is my vision, during this past week, what have I done to be able to get me there? Have I been successful in moving things forward? Do I need to change strategy in some way? And how can I make sure that I can continue to persist in order to be able to reach the long-term goal? The last part of this, or the last trait that I think is very important, is to be very results-oriented. And so I look at all the things that I've been able to be a part of in some way. National Society of Black Engineers, Adaptive, the MEPA, and Bioregeneration Technologies, as well as here, Purdue MEP, and understand, in every context, in every position that I hold, I always look to a result or a change that has occurred from the work that I've done. It is always my intent to change things so that they move better, they are in a better place than where I began. And so I think any leader that's successful is very results-oriented, so that you can always look back on any of your experiences and be able to say that these are the ways in which things have changed as a result of the work that I've done, or the work that the team has done overall. I think it's critical to think about results, because if you're not thinking about results, then you won't be able to reach the vision overall. And with that, that's all I have prepared as far as slides, but I am open to answering any questions that you may have on any of the slides or anything that I've talked about today. So I did not work with Cook Biotech formally. We did meet a few times because some of the stuff that they do with the company is similar to the sort of research that they've done. So the regulatory things that I spoke about before, so we spoke with them to understand from their perspective how they were able to get through regulatory hurdles. And they've looked at the technology as well as seen it as a good technology, so we've had those sorts of conversations. Yeah. Yes?
So you mentioned at the beginning that you're a reserved introvert and kind of how that has played into your different experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that I necessarily fell into that category, but I've worked in teams where that I want to try to help move up into those leadership positions are kind of that way. So what are your recommendations as somebody that's trying to bring somebody out of as a leader that's like that, like how to do that effectively and what kind of support to give those kind of people?
All right, so the question was, so I describe myself as a reserved introvert. How do you help others who you may see within the same mold to be able to step into leadership positions? One, I think, is to change the mold of what one sees as a leader. So to help them to look around you and identify folks who are like them that hold leadership roles so that they can see themselves in those shoes and understand that you don't have to be an extrovert. You don't have to be extraordinarily outgoing to be a leader, but you do have to be able to manage personal interaction and be comfortable with that. The other thing is to give them smaller opportunities and demonstrate success to them. So allow them to be successful and build on that success, and I think that builds confidence to be able to do more. In my experiences, very early on, I was very hesitant when I started out in NSBE to do anything for chapter leadership. But someone came along and gave me a small project and said, do this. I think you can do this, you can handle it. And I did it, I was successful, and that led to me wanting to do more. So I think that helps people to step out of their shells. Mm-hmm. Yes?
So you said in the middle of the slide summary that whenever you're trying to get members of your team towards a goal, just be clear on what you demand of them. But not every time is everyone willing to put the effort in.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they just don't care. So how do you make sure that they're not just ghosting the team, they're actually trying to do something?
So the question was, how do you ensure that people all buy into the goals that you set for them and continue to work towards them so that they actually meet the goals? So that can be a challenge in different circumstances. It's much easier when you're paying people because you can take the pay away. When you're dealing with volunteers or you're dealing in a classroom with grades, it's a little bit different, but there are ways in which to motivate people to be successful. One way is, for those who are actually performing, to regularly recognize that they are performing. So I like to, for my team members, put up, what everyone's goals are, and for those who are meeting their goals, to make sure to call them out in a public way or to provide them public praise, because praise is actually a very powerful motivator for people, as is embarrassment. And so on the flip side, you want to be very careful in how you manage this. There are a couple of ways to subtly call out non-performance and to directly call out non-performance. So one way to do it is if you have a board where you have people and what their goals are, you can easily, for a date, put green, yellow, red. Green meaning achieved, yellow meaning, either in progress or in danger, and red meaning not performing. If you just make that visual, you don't have to say much as long as it's in a public manner. So if you're amongst the team as a team leader and you show the visual of who's meeting their goals and who's not meeting their goals, without even discussing, any particular individual or calling them out for any reason, you can just show that as, this is where we stand. This is the current status. No one wants to be red in that situation. And so that's a motivator in and of itself. And the other way to deal with it is when you're in the team setting and you have folks that are hitting red, sometimes that's not necessarily non-performance. It's just that there is something that's going on that they need assistance with. And so that's a time in meeting with the team to look at all areas, do a status report, and you focus your team on managing the red. If everything is green, then you're good, but if there are red areas, then you want to manage the red as a team. So talk to everyone and say, okay, these two areas are somehow out of tolerance, so let's have a conversation about how we can get it into tolerance. So ask the person who's responsible for it to give you a status update and provide some information on what assistance they need. So what's the progress, what are the issues, and how can we deal with the issues as a team? And so that takes some of the pressure off of them, but still provides the public visual to say that there is non-performance in this area. Other questions?